Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to latest Walkabout Talkabout. Today, we've got Chris Reyman, the composer of Walkabout Mini Golf. So I'm going to go ahead and take my first putt, and then we'll have Chris introduce himself. So I'm Lucas Martell, by the way. I am the creator of the game, and I have not played this course in a while, so this is good to get back here. But yeah, Chris, maybe you can just kind of give us a little bio while you start playing here.
A bio, geez, how formal.
Yeah, no, I want the full collated all of the details, some footnotes, the whole thing.
Well, my bio in terms of maybe as it's relevant here, more so is Lucas and I went to school together, both degrees in music, and have worked on projects for, I don't know, the last couple decades, I guess, it seems like, various things. And, don't mind me, I'm just going to find a ball here while I'm chatting. Keep looking around. I also went on to school and did a couple degrees, my graduate work, and have been focusing on, I do mostly jazz and improvised music, but I also am composing music in a lot of different ways. And mostly these days, I've been focused on my work with Mighty Coconut and the things I'm doing here with Lucas.
Yeah. Well, so why don't we actually even kind of dig into those a little bit? Because really the type of stuff that you're doing for Walkabout is really different than the previous couple of projects, because I guess the first one that we had done would have been Pigeon Impossible back in, I guess we had done a couple of other things in school, but the actual thing that people might have seen was, you did all the score for Pigeon Impossible. That came out in 2009, so that's been, 15 years basically since that first one. But maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the film stuff we've done with Pigeon Impossible and with OceanMaker.
Yeah, the Pigeon Impossible, it's funny to kind of think back on that project because I can't talk and play at the same time. This is going to be fun.
That's
Great.
My secret. I make you say all the words and then I get to win.
Yeah. I often talk to students of mine. I think something else probably relevant I should have said in my when I was mentioning my bio is that I'm also a professor at University of Texas at El Paso, and so oftentimes when I'm talking to students or people that are wanting to get into film music, they always ask, how do you get into it? How do you start doing it? And really, from my perspective, it was just knowing Lucas and going to school. But at that time, when I was a student, I was doing a lot of writing and arranging and work for jazz bands mostly. And Pigeon Impossible had a heavy influence. I think that when we went into that project, it was, the film itself was 6-7 minutes long or something like that. Yeah. And there might have been 3 or 4 minutes of music, and at least half of that was really focused on more of the kind of jazz side of things. And so just having that kind of expertise in that style of music is sort of what got me in. And then I had to quickly learn and work more on the orchestration side. And back in that project, we did that super old school. I was writing pencil and paper, just kind of working on my cues, not even using a DAW really. I was just, doing, using a notation program and hitting play when I hit play in the QuickTime movie and just, trying to sync things up. And that's, that's kind of how we did that project. And, fast forward to OceanMaker, which was 10 years later, maybe 9, 8, or so years after that.
It was 2014 that one came out. So yeah, it would have been 5 years later. But yeah,
seemed like
we're
forever.
not that old yet, although we're getting there.
Yeah. But fast forward to OceanMaker, then I had a little more of the tech side of things. Nice. You're gonna make me look bad.
Hey.
I'm just the piano player, so.
But yeah, so that was so Pigeon Impossible and OceanMaker. By the way, we should also say for folks who aren't familiar, those are both animated short films. Pigeon Impossible went on to become Spies in Disguise with Will Smith and Tom Holland. OceanMaker is still actually floating around. There's a chance that could get made, but also, Hollywood. It's a whole thing. But both of those scores we did almost entirely with live musicians. We had, I think it was like a 40 piece for Pigeon Impossible, and then we augmented that with another group later. And then OceanMaker, we kind of did the same thing where I think we had maybe a smaller string section, and then we went back and we did percussion and vocalists and kind of did separate things. But all of those were completely live, sort of like live orchestra sessions, which is very different because... Oh, go ahead. Yeah, keep talking.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, we did it like that. It was all pretty, low budget, did a lot of it ourselves. I might have had, I think in Pigeon Impossible, I actually got a couple copyists to help me out. But usually, I mean, with OceanMaker, I got all the parts together myself. It's sort of like a one-man band almost. It's like I started in the DAW and kind of, worked on some things with Lucas, got some demos together, and then orchestrated, did all the notation, got all the parts together. We made our click track for the sessions, and I think OceanMaker, well, both of those involved sessions. We did like one big session with orchestra, and also smaller sessions in a studio with like a percussion ensemble. We did something with a choir. And OceanMaker, we did have a couple digital things that we added in also, but it was super minimal. I mean, maybe 3 instruments or something out of the whole 10-minute score were digital samples. Yeah.
So actually, let me also just plug a couple of other videos, because we actually did do a 3 or 4 minute version for both Pigeon Impossible and OceanMaker that is literally the sessions that we did. It's the recording. It's also interviews with you that are actually, so if you're at all interested in like any of those projects, check out OceanMaker soundtrack or OceanMaker recording the music. I forget exactly what we called it, but it would be on this Mighty Coconut channel, and you can see sort of like a bunch of that stuff. But I maybe want to kind of even jump back and cover maybe some stuff that we didn't cover in those a little bit, because you were starting to talk a little bit about how you got into it, and especially being a teacher, I'm sure you've got a lot of other, what are those kind of the most common questions that people are asking, and how to get into it is probably the number one. I want to pull on that thread maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, getting into it, I mean, it's a tricky thing, because I feel, most of my work and a lot of what I've been doing has centered around Mighty Coconut. So from my perspective, it's very much like, finding the people you want to work with and just hanging around and figuring out how to do stuff, But in terms of like the sorts of skills you can gain, I mean, there's just so much to do now in the industry, like that's so much that's expected of you, so you got to be able to write music that works for the project, but you also have to be able to work with people and adapt things and figure out how to collaborate, right? But then in addition to that, you also need to have some skills on the tech side, being able to do things in a DAW and mix and master your own music, and even if you have other people that are doing those things for you, you kind of have to be able to do that in the initial stages, because oftentimes, I've been lucky enough to work with Lucas, who can hear things that are super rough and be able to imagine what they're going to sound like. So for example, with Pigeon Impossible, I think some of the initial things that I worked on, I was just playing on the piano and sending recordings to Lucas, and he was like, oh yeah, that would work, or maybe not this or something, but there's some people that don't have that imagination. It's kind of an old school sort of skill to hear something played on an instrument and then be able to, like, in your mind's ear, imagine what it would sound like with other instruments. But nowadays, since everyone has the technology and samples are so prevalent, stuff just almost has to sound perfect right away when you send it to someone. I've had experiences with filmmakers that I've been working on projects where I send them a rough track to get some feedback, and their response is, well, this doesn't sound good, or this isn't going to sound good the way it is. I'm like, yeah, it's a rough draft, So it's, there's a lot that's expected of a composer from the initial stages all the way to the final product that used to be a lot of different people doing it, but now it kind of needs to be one person. That being said, there are, things that people specialize in. And to me, I've noticed that with music composition, the people that are successful are people that have, like broad skills where they can do a lot of different things, but then they have that thing that's sort of their own that they can do well. And I'm still fostering that a little bit. I think that some of the latest releases we've done, I've tapped more into some of the jazz stuff that I've been doing my whole life, I think I hadn't really, explored that in a while. I've been kind of focused on, how can I learn more of like the orchestration side, or do more of this, or make it sound more cinematic, or like these things that then when I add it back into the mix, some of the things that I just like to play and like to hear, it makes it a little bit more unique.
Yeah. So kind of related to what you were just talking about there, how has your process changed, like especially kind of starting this project, which like you mentioned, you were doing it all digitally, you're doing it with samples as opposed to live orchestra, and you're actually doing the final piece, the final thing that people hear is coming straight from you. How has that changed, and then how has that sort of evolved now that we've done what I guess probably we're up to about 20 different courses that we've released, and a couple of those even have multiple tracks in them. So yeah, how has everything evolved for your process?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's very the process is very circular in a way. I think that initially, like from the beginning, I started getting more, like building up my sample library and getting some other things happening, and it's such a pull to want to start just start in your sample library and start making cool sounds, because it's so easy now. Just get some reverb going, get some interesting instruments, and then all of a sudden you have something that sounds cool. And I think I know that Lucas, you and I have talked about this a lot. The best result comes from when you start with pencil and paper, and kind of build from the ground up. And I find that I can get drawn into just making cool sounds on with my sample libraries, but the pieces that I've done for Walkabout and otherwise, the things that I feel like hold up the best and that I'm most happy with the end result are things that have been me starting with just staff paper and a pencil sitting at the piano. And so, it took me, I think, doing a few things for Walkabout, maybe some things that didn't make the cut, or some things that I had to kind of go back and really work on a lot. It took me having those experiences to realize that just starting, the way I would start any composition, the way I would start writing a piece for someone to play in a recital hall or something, it's still like sit down with the paper, or imagine it, be thinking about what something sounds like before grabbing the instruments, so that you don't fall into the trap of having the samples start writing the composition for you. In a way, it's evolved, but it's been kind of like, well, that's where I started before I had all the sample libraries.
I'm just remembering now, even a couple of tracks that we kind of did that, and I think that there's also a tendency with a lot of the sample libraries that you kind of learn certain instruments that sound good, or do you really truly just start out on paper and just sort of a knowledge of other like instrumentation, or do you do any sort of like, oh, let me just see what instruments I have or that could work at all, or do you really push that off so that you don't get sucked into it?
Well, I think it's always a consideration when it comes to projects that use samples. It's always a consideration of knowing what works and what doesn't work, or what's just going to take a ton of time. So I don't know if I even remember this whole. Am I aiming for this little thing here? Is that the
You do
best
whatever you
route?
want to do. You play it. You play your game.
Okay. Well, I'll
You shoot
go
your
down the stairs.
You go that. Yeah, go that way too. You could do that. That's fine.
Since that's what's happening.
Not what I would have
it's
done,
always,
but
yeah. Thanks. It's always a consideration with sample libraries, that there are certain things that work really well, and it's pretty easy just to make that happen, and other things that don't work well. But I tend to, when I'm starting a new course, I start by, just like I was saying, like any piece of music I'd start. I have some various pieces of paper, scraps, things that I'm just keeping some notes, and some of those notes are instrumentation, and usually that has more to do with what I would like to happen on the course than what I know is in my sample library, because I can always go and try and pick something else up, or we haven't really done this for Walkabout yet, but I could also record some instruments, do something. For me, sometimes it's easier to write out a part and get someone to record something than it is to fiddle with something in a sample library, and it's more fun for me. But the thing that's harder about that with Walkabout is just the pace and sort of the iterative process, so getting something happening and then knowing that, well, a few weeks from now, something might change in the course, or something might happen at some point where we realize that the music needs to be a little bit different, or, it's a little faster paced in a way, when it comes to from the design to when something comes out. And, we're all working on it together, like with a film, for example, we're always waiting for, when is it picture locked? When can I start writing music? And even after that point, something can change, of course. But, it's like the overall essence of the film is pretty much there. You're not going to change something in the 11th hour that changes the whole concept, and then you need different music, hopefully.
Although you will change shots and change timings and completely destroy all of the structure that you put in place. So.
Exactly, and then you have to just start over, basically.
Yeah.
But, in Walkabout, that doesn't usually happen, but people are working on these courses for a long period of time, and things are changing, and things are, coming in and out and shifting. And so, I tend to get music in, it seems like fairly early on, just because I have an itch to get it done, and to get to work on it. And then sometimes things sort of shift at some point. And so, it makes it hard to do any sort of recording sessions, for sure. But still, at the beginning, I'm still starting with paper where I'm writing down instruments that I want to use, writing down certain, sketching out harmonic ideas, melodic ideas. It's still that same kind of process where I'm just looking for that kind of germ of an idea that's going to kind of hold it all together. The best that what's best for the course.
Yeah. Well, just to kind of give people a little context on that. So typically a course takes about 12 months from start to finish, some longer, some less. We will be dropping this after Alfheim, but you mentioned something that you'd worked on way back in the day. You had the track for Alfheim finished probably about a year and a half ago, maybe even, and it's just now coming out. But Alfheim has been sort of the one that we had been holding on to for reasons. And it was just sort of like production schedule. So there was a lot of things around that. That's not typical, but sometimes you are working out, a solid 6 to 9 months before a course even drops. So
yeah, absolutely. and Alfheim is a great example. I think it might have been longer than that. I don't want to reveal too much, but I had that track as some of like the early batches that I was working on. When we first started working. And I don't know all the reasons that things were delayed with that course in particular, but I just played it a few days ago, and I'd been away from the headset for a while, and I played that course after all the work that's gone into it, and it had that feeling of like, that's why they waited. Like, this is, like it's, it's gorgeous. And I was in there and I kept thinking like, that music I did so long ago, there's got to be something better I can do. And as I played it, I was like, nope, that holds up. That makes complete sense in this context. It's fascinating hearing, something from so long ago that I worked on, a couple years ago maybe, and having it just sort of make sense and work just as it is.
Well, I definitely think that one of the other big challenges that we have talked about, but it's something that you also just tend to do a really, really good job of, and it's surprisingly difficult, which is writing music that is really good and it has a melody and it has, it feels like it's very of the place, but also feels like something that can loop because people are playing games in multiplayer for typically an hour, and something that you can even this track that's playing right now, the fact that this can just be on loop for an hour and doesn't get old, that you still just love it. That's a really fine line to walk. Are there a couple of particular instances that you can think of where you've had to kind of work around that or even change things to help them fit with that idea?
I was just listening to and working on music for some of the older courses because I, along with the second volume of the soundtrack that came out, I was also working on. I had, just for my own reasons, no one asked for this. I don't know if anyone wants it, but I wanted to put together some sheet music of some of the courses, and so I was working on some of the older courses, and one of them was Babylon, the Hanging Gardens, and that track. There was something about that track that I remembered as it's pretty strong melodically, and I remember when we were working on it, there was at some point where you just had this instinct of the melody is great, but it's too much, and I just took it out at one point, but left everything else sort of the same, and then brought part of that melody back later. Like a way of just working around it was, well, if I take this melody and have it happen twice, but take some parts of it out in certain places, it's almost like a puzzle. Like when you put it all together, you hear the whole thing, but you don't really hear the whole thing throughout the music when it's playing while you're playing the game. So it's almost, like finding these ways of leaving something unsaid, like leaving that space there that leaves space for people to talk and play, but also it might have sort of a subconscious way of people filling in the blanks. It's like you leave some space there and someone listening to it has to kind of complete the musical idea themselves, and then it also can draw them in a little bit to that composition.
Yeah, the melody is something that we've talked about quite a bit, because usually melodies run the risk of being a little earwiggy, is the term that we've used a couple of times, where it's just like something will get stuck in your head, and if you're on a course for a really long time. In fact, I remember Tourist Trap, which is I think the very first one that you did. So the music for Welcome Island is actually one of your original tracks for Tourist Trap, that we ended up sort of simplifying for Tourist Trap and doing that exact thing of simplifying the melody and just reducing some parts of it, because ironically, now that we have Welcome Island, people actually spend a lot of time on there, but originally it was just the hut where you just selected the course and you weren't spending time in Welcome Island for any particular reason. So it didn't seem, at the time, it didn't seem to be as much of an issue. Right.
I mean, there are other courses that the music is super melodic. I mean, Seagull Stacks is one of those that, that one, that's probably the course that I've received the most fan mail about, like the most that is mentioned when people contact me, just about the music. And that one, that's another one that I put together some piano sheet music for, and I even I've been playing that composition a lot, and so I actually created kind of revisited the music for it and created another track that I'm just performing the melody, and that one, it's completely melodic the whole time. Yeah. But it works in that context. It's sort of, there are instances like courses that kind of need that, or that hearing that melody kind of makes sense in that context. I think Sweetopia is another one. It's like that melody, it's a lot, but it makes sense in that context.
Sweetopia is it's sweet. Saccharine is maybe even a good, by design, it's supposed to be like that. So that's good example of one where, yeah, it absolutely needs that. And I think everyone's witnessing just us sort of like working out. And next time, now that you've said this, and now that it's out there for the rest of the world to know, now next time I ever say, hey, I think we need to pull back, now you could just point to this and be like, hey, remember? And
Yeah.
basically just tell me to shove off and do my job. Let you do yours.
No, I would never do that. No, I mean, you have great instincts when it comes to the music side of things, and you often are able to point something out, like a pretty simple statement about something I'm working on that might sting a little bit at first or something. No, actually, maybe it never stings. You usually know how to sugarcoat things. But, like you'll mention something that at first I'm kind of like, oh, come on. Like, I don't know. But the more I think about it, the more it makes complete sense. I mean, I even think back to, Pigeon Impossible and OceanMaker. Mm-hmm. There were these times that you pointed things out that I might have even tried to fight for. But then, I think I probably folded in the end and went your way. I mean, you're the director. But, when I listen to the final product, I'm like, yeah. But then hearing the real thing, I'm like, yep, that's exactly what needed to happen. That was the right choice.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, there is definitely that whole sort of like, I mean, I would say that I feel like with all the courses, even though you do start so early, it's pretty rare for you. Like I don't think we ever have you start before we really know what the course is. And usually there's at least some art for it. And there's a really strong sense of like the tone. And in fact, I'm not going to say even a specific course because it's one that will not have been released by the time this Talkabout drops, but something that we know that you could do something with the music that is a little bit out there because it's going to complement the tone of the course, or it's going to complement some of the humor in a way that it doesn't have to be so on the nose. So I think that, yeah, that we've there's definitely some of those things that you generally have an idea, although whenever you say that, it's always a challenge because we all have different ideas of what that is actually going to look like, or tone is one of the most difficult things to put words into, to actually sort of like define like,
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you do a good job with that. I mean, oftentimes starting a course, you have 3 or 5 words that you're using to kind of describe it, and usually those stick throughout. Because I've gone back and looked at some old notes of older courses and kind of remembered like, oh yeah, that's how this was pitched to me in the beginning, and then I can see the final result with the music and all the visuals and everything, and it's like, oh yeah, that's exactly, that was the target, that was what we started with, and it kind of holds up. So yeah, a lot of people are not good at that. Oftentimes it's sort of the joke, it's like, could you make this one more like fluffy or more green? Could it be,
oh yeah,
it's like, I don't know, what do you mean by that in musical terms,
Well, and we will often share references around. So we'll grab pieces of all sorts of different music. And a lot of times it's all over the place. And very seldom I feel like is it ever one track. It always comes with some caveats, sort of like the way the percussion works in this one. And sometimes it's not even like, it's not copying it. It's just sort of like the pace or the tempo or the time signature or details like that. A lot of times, we have a long list of those.
Yeah, and that's actually, back to process, that is a pretty strong part of my process is, I've gotten a lot of mileage in compositions with just taking 2 different pieces of music and putting them together. 2 things that are very, very different that no one would think of in the same world, and like you can take these 2 different things and create something new. But they, having that sort of guide you a little bit, having something that's like this track is totally not the right feel, but check out the drums. Like that's, the percussion, like that's sort of what we want, something kind of like that, or that's what I'm hearing when I, am thinking about this music. And that's super helpful. I mean, it can be really challenging to not just replicate that, but, having that as a guide is really helpful. I mean, it's just like having any other references, on the visual side or anything else. So
we're on the last hole that we're going to play here. So I have to throw you either a softball or a really nasty hardball. What are some of the either like your favorite, or if you want to even list like what are the couple of favorites that you have for whatever reason?
Favorite
Favorite
music?
tracks that you've done for Walkabout. Pick your favorite child.
My favorite child. Well, let's see. I mean, I have been going back and listening to them recently, so I do have a few in mind. I mean, the Seagull Stacks I mentioned, I've been playing that one quite a bit lately. So that's one that. Is it my turn?
Yeah, it's your turn.
I don't know why I can't. Oh, here we go. I see.
It blends in with the sand,
Seagull Stacks. Seagull Stacks is one that I'm really happy with the way that one works, like fully as a fully formed composition, even like beyond the gameplay. There are other ones, like another one that I started messing around with, and I actually created another track for this one, was Arizona Modern. That's one that sort of snuck up on me as being one that I like, and it was because it was getting a lot of plays on Spotify, and I kind of at that time I was like, that's weird, and I went back and listened to it, and I got into it a little more. I actually wrote out some sheet music for it, and sort of it was one of the, like, an example of me going back and like almost analyzing, like, what did I do here, like why does this work in the way it works. And so that one I was super into. On the other side of it, though, in terms of kind of like the overall production and orchestration, Laser Lair is something that, that I'm super happy with the way that one came out altogether. And there's another one coming out, I think later this year, that I'm also really happy with the way the overall sound works, and just kind of this combination of some of my jazz background with some orchestration stuff and melodic composition, and those are those kinds of courses I really love the way they worked. Coming back and listening to the music for the second volume of the soundtrack, these last courses, I'm also really happy with the way that Labyrinth and Mist came out. Both of those have sort of similar things happening, and of course they're both licensed courses, and so it's they had a different feel because of the material that we were working with, but totally work. Are there any that I didn't mention? I mean, that was almost all of them.
Yeah, basically all of them. You like everything you've ever done, is what I'm hearing.
I like all my music that I make.
Yeah, but I mean, Mist and Labyrinth are two really good. Like, that's a very unique challenge as well, because both of those. So, not to go too deep into the business side, but when you license something to do a course, you don't necessarily get the music rights. And we often try, but sometimes it's really challenging for a wide variety of reasons. So both of those were courses that you needed to do something that was completely original and wasn't ripping off anything that had been done, but still felt sort of that, like the Walkabout idea, but it like loosely inspired by. How do you go about something like that? Because I believe that both of those tracks are going to be on this new volume of the soundtrack.
Well, they were kind of different processes. I mean, with Labyrinth, it was more going back to anything that wasn't David Bowie, any of that music that was there.
More the incidental soundtrack score stuff, more so than the actual,
and that's kind of era of music also, and so that's kind of what I did there. Really focused in and listened to a lot of, watch the movie, listen to some of that more incidental music, and tried to just pick out some things that to me sounded very much like it was of that world. And it's a little bit similar with Mist. I mean, I think with Mist, we actually, I worked on some things that involved melodies from the original music. at some point, and then backed off of it. And so I had it kind of in my brain a little bit, but also just took some instrumentation and sounds that I heard in that music. For example, like the timpani. That's something that comes out of me as being very, not something I use a lot in a lot of the other courses, but was such an effective part of that music in the original game. And also
instrumentation
some of
really defines the sound of that.
Exactly.
It's oboe,
the double reed,
yeah.
the bassoon and oboe that I used, and also some of the effects, like the delay that they used, and also some of the, just taking kind of like boiling down some of the rhythmic things that they did, some of the things they did with the rhythm, and just trying to kind of get it to be a little bit more general, but of that same world. But yeah, I like the way they turned out for sure.
Yeah, cool. Well, we'll have to do another one of these probably when I've got a few other questions in my head now, but I'll have to save those for the next time when Volume 3 launches in another year probably.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, but we'll include the links to the soundtrack as well as you mentioned the sheet music. Anything else that you want to mention or plug before we go here?
No, I think those are the things that we put out here recently, and I'm interested to see how we kind of keep moving forward. I know there were people, really anticipating the second volume coming out. So hopefully the music will come out a little bit quicker. It's kind of hard to know how quickly we can do it or how many tracks we can put on something we release. Apologies for those of you that are just itching to hear that music when you're driving around town or whatever it is you're doing.
I was about to say just put on the headset, but not while you're driving. We strongly discourage that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, check out the soundtrack, check out the music, and enjoy.
Yeah, awesome, cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining and watching us play around.